The victims included his father and uncle and 6 others in his extended family.
They wound up convicting him of 8 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated assault, and 2 drug charges.
You seen the pictures, man. You know God could have done that.
Ask the law, because they should know.
Oh my God, dude.
Brutally beating his father and 7 other family members and friends to death inside their mobile home 4 years ago. A 3-year-old boy survived the attack.
The sun had barely risen on August 29, 2009, when Glynn County Police Dispatcher Lisa Vizena picked up an emergency call at exactly 8:15 a.m. The voice on the other end was frantic, breathless, and breaking under the strain of panic. "My whole family is dead," screamed Guy Heinze Jr. "They've been beaten to death." Deputies arrived swiftly at the New Hope Mobile Home Park, a modest cluster of trailers on the outskirts of Brunswick, Georgia. As officers approached Lot 147, a grim silence filled the air, broken only by distant sobbing. Inside, a nightmare awaited, one that would soon shock the community and earn the grim title, the worst massacre in Georgia's history. Stepping cautiously through the trailer door, officers encountered a scene so gruesome it would haunt them forever. Bodies lay sprawled throughout the cramped residence, each beaten beyond recognition. Blood-splattered walls, furniture, and floors, creating an overwhelming, chaotic tapestry of violence. 7 people were already dead. Among them were 44-year-old Russell Toller Sr., a protective father figure known for his loyalty, his children, Russell Jr., just 20, and Michelle, only 15, her dreams and laughter forever silenced. Nearby lay Chrissy Toller, a young mother of 22, whose small child miraculously survived, hidden among the wreckage. Guy Heinze Sr., a close friend to the Tollers, was also lifeless, his past struggles now meaningless in the face of such brutality. Beside him was Brenda Gale Falligan, 49, a steadfast family friend, and Joseph West, 30, whose frequent presence made him practically family. Tragically, another victim, 19-year-old Michael Toller, clung desperately to life. Born with Down syndrome, Michael was a bright presence whose joyous spirit had warmed the hearts of everyone around him. Yet, even he wouldn't survive the next day, adding one more name to the list of victims. Amid the chaos, officers turned their attention to Guy Heinze Jr., who remained inconsolable outside. His demeanor was raw and distraught, but soon, troubling questions began to arise. Could the caller, who seemed genuinely horrified, also be the perpetrator? Was his panic genuine, or an elaborate mask? Within hours, investigators found themselves at a disturbing crossroads. A horrifying crime had shattered a community, but the journey to uncover the truth had only just begun. The cramped trailer at Lot 147 in New Hope Mobile Home Park had never been luxurious, but it was home, lively, cluttered, and filled with voices. Now, in the grim silence, police faced the overwhelming aftermath of unprecedented violence. Every inch revealed horror, each detail painting a chilling portrait of what had unfolded overnight. Investigators carefully documented the scene, struggling to absorb the sheer brutality inflicted upon the victims. The trailer, a simple, modest space meant for a small family, had housed as many as 13 people at times, bound not just by blood, but by necessity and friendship. The close quarters left little room for escape when violence erupted. Russell Toller Sr. was found in his bedroom, his body brutally battered, surrounded by the signs of a struggle. He had fought back, fiercely protective until the very end. Nearby, his son Russell Jr. lay motionless, his young life abruptly ended. The brutality inflicted upon them suggested intense anger, a deeply personal assault that investigators immediately took note of. In another room, the lifeless body of Brenda Gale Falligan was discovered. Her gentle and nurturing nature had made her a comforting presence for everyone. Close by, Joseph West's remains painted a picture of sudden, ruthless violence, his friendship with the family tragically extinguished in moments. But perhaps most haunting was the fate of the young victims. Michelle Toller, vibrant and bright, had suffered injuries so severe that identification was heartbreaking. Chrissy, whose small daughter miraculously survived by hiding amidst the chaos, lay nearby, her final moments unthinkably traumatic. Michael, their beloved brother with Down syndrome, clung precariously to life in a hospital bed, a stark reminder of innocence brutally attacked. Scattered throughout the trailer, evidence of normal life persisted: children's toys, family photographs, leftover meals. The familiarity and ordinariness of these details only deepened the investigators' horror. What had transformed this humble home into the scene of Georgia's deadliest family massacre? As forensic teams began processing evidence, it became clear that each victim had been bludgeoned by a blunt instrument, a relentless and merciless attack. Yet strangely, no murder weapon was immediately found. The absence of forced entry suggested the killer was likely someone trusted or familiar, someone who knew the family's routine intimately. Outside, investigators watched as neighbors gathered, their faces etched with disbelief. The Heinze and Toller families had been well liked, ordinary people living ordinary lives. The violence was inexplicable, the motive hidden deep beneath the wreckage of shattered relationships and stolen lives. As they continued meticulously combing through the scene, detectives grappled with a painful question. Who, capable of such brutality, could have been welcomed into this home? From the very first moments following the discovery of the massacre, suspicion hung heavily over 22-year-old Guy Heinze Jr. It wasn't simply that he was the one who discovered the carnage, or even his frantic emotional call to 911. It was his proximity to the victims, his knowledge of their routines, and subtle inconsistencies in his statements that raised investigators' eyebrows. Guy had spent the previous day with friends, drifting between casual hangouts and errands, seemingly without a clear schedule. He claimed that the evening before discovering the murders, he'd visited a friend named Zach, shared some drinks, and then returned briefly to the family trailer. Nothing unusual happened, he insisted, painting a picture of normality amidst tragedy. Yet, when pressed further, small contradictions appeared. Friends reported Guy had spoken openly about his strained relationship with his father, Guy Heinze Sr., hinting at deeper tensions than initially revealed. Though investigators had yet to piece together a clear motive, these subtle details cast shadows over Guy's credibility. Additionally, forensic analysis soon complicated matters. Blood and physical evidence suggested a brutal, sustained attack carried out by someone intimately familiar with the trailer's layout. Detectives noted that the heinous nature of the killings implied rage or deep resentment, emotions more commonly linked to personal grudges than random acts of violence. Even Guy's demeanor sparked suspicion. His initial emotional outbursts gave way to shifting explanations and a hesitancy under questioning. Police wondered aloud, could grief and shock alone account for these discrepancies, or was something darker at play? As scrutiny intensified, troubling details emerged from Guy's past. He had prior run-ins with the law, including theft and drug charges. Though these offenses were minor compared to murder, they painted him as a troubled young man whose impulsive decisions sometimes led to reckless outcomes. Guy himself seemed increasingly aware of the mounting suspicion, yet steadfastly maintained his innocence, adamant that his family had meant everything to him. "Why would I hurt them?" he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. Investigators faced a disturbing dilemma. Was this grieving young man truly a killer, hiding guilt beneath tears and confusion? Or was he simply an easy target, a convenient suspect whose chaotic lifestyle had inadvertently made him vulnerable? As evidence piled up, the pressure grew immense, both on Guy Heinze Jr. and on the detectives tasked with untangling the truth from suspicion. But one thing remained certain: they were determined to find justice wherever the evidence might lead them. News of the massacre spread quickly throughout Brunswick, Georgia, shaking the quiet community to its core. Nothing of this magnitude had ever occurred here, in this place of humble living, where trailers lined quiet roads and neighbors knew each other's routines and faces by heart. Overnight, the friendly town became wrapped in a heavy veil of disbelief and horror. Friends, neighbors, and strangers alike gathered near Lot 147, staring in stunned silence as police tape fluttered around the crime scene. They whispered the victims' names: Russell Sr., Guy Sr., Chrissy, Brenda, with tears streaming and eyes filled with unanswered questions. How could something this horrific occur in a place known only for tight-knit relationships and quiet struggles? At Glen Academy, where young Michelle Toller had been a bright, hopeful student, grief counselors comforted classmates struggling to accept that their friend would never return. Teachers spoke softly about her gentle laughter and kindness. Unable to comprehend her tragic fate, her empty desk stood as a stark reminder of stolen innocence and shattered dreams. Local businesses placed signs in windows, messages of sorrow and unity displayed plainly for all to see. Town leaders addressed frightened residents at community meetings, urging calm, even as fear began to seep into daily routines. Parents kept their children close, doors remained locked tightly, and sleepless nights became commonplace. Amid the sadness, anger simmered beneath the surface. How could anyone be capable of such cruelty? Friends who knew the victims closely spoke about their struggles openly, about how they lived modestly, always helping one another, sharing the burdens of everyday life. These were not strangers. They were faces everyone recognized and respected. Yet beneath this communal grief lay an undercurrent of unease. Neighbors whispered quietly about Guy Heinze Jr., unable to fully dismiss the possibility that someone so close might be responsible. Many knew of his struggles and tensions within his family. Though no one wanted to believe he was capable of murder, doubt lingered quietly, unspoken, yet unmistakably present. The community waited anxiously, desperate for answers as investigators tirelessly searched for clues. Each passing day intensified the need for resolution, for something, anything, that might restore a sense of safety and justice to Brunswick. And as residents struggled to reconcile their fear with the reality of the massacre, they collectively wondered, would they ever feel safe again? Investigators wrestled with an agonizing question: why? Days after the massacre, detectives still had no clear explanation for the carnage that devastated the Heinze and Toller families. Brunswick demanded answers, but the deeper authorities dug into the victims' lives, the more complex the puzzle became. Living conditions inside the overcrowded trailer quickly emerged as a focus. Up to 13 people had sometimes crammed into the small, worn-down space, tensions inevitably flaring amid close quarters and financial strain. Could simmering resentments or long-standing arguments have erupted into deadly violence? Friends and relatives admitted the family had faced significant struggles. Guy Heinze Sr. had battled substance abuse and legal troubles, and while he loved his son, their relationship was known to be strained. Investigators pondered whether buried tensions could have ignited this tragedy, leaving a catastrophic aftermath behind. Then there was the matter of money. Detectives uncovered reports of minor thefts and financial disputes within the household. Guy Jr. himself was known to have money problems, a pattern that troubled police. Could desperation over debts or disputes about money lead to such extreme violence? But investigators also noted a startling lack of definitive evidence for any clear financial motive. Despite their difficulties, the family members generally supported one another emotionally and materially, sharing food and resources freely. They struggled together rather than apart, suggesting financial disagreements alone might not explain the viciousness of the murders. Another avenue police explored was the possibility of drug-related motives. Some neighbors spoke hesitantly about occasional drug activity around the trailer park, suggesting outsiders or local dealers might have had reasons to harm the family. Could this tragedy have been a message, punishment for debts unpaid or alliances broken? However, investigators quickly dismissed a drug cartel or outsider scenario due to the intimate brutality of the killings. Such savage attacks, carried out personally and violently, suggested deep-seated personal rage, not impersonal business. Whoever committed these murders knew the victims intimately, understanding their vulnerabilities, schedules, and even their sleeping arrangements. Still, without concrete evidence or confession, detectives could only speculate, combing through each victim's past and meticulously interviewing acquaintances, friends, and surviving relatives. They had no choice but to keep searching, digging deeper into the lives of those lost and those who remained behind, hoping the truth might finally surface. As each day passed, Brunswick awaited justice. Without understanding why, the trauma inflicted remained unbearable. The police knew they couldn't rest until the motive, no matter how deeply hidden, was finally uncovered. As investigators worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery, crucial forensic evidence slowly surfaced. Officers combed meticulously through the blood-soaked trailer, inch by inch, collecting hair, fibers, blood samples, and fingerprints. Each piece of evidence was critical, potentially leading directly to the killer. Early in the investigation, detectives uncovered troubling details. A pair of shorts belonging to Guy Heinze Jr. was discovered, with traces of blood matching some of the victims. His shoes also showed minute bloodstains, nearly invisible to the naked eye but unmistakably linking him to the scene. These findings pushed suspicion toward certainty, strengthening the growing case against Heinze. Police also noted something peculiar. Despite the horrific violence, the trailer showed no clear signs of forced entry, indicating the killer likely had free access. Guy Jr. admitted he had returned to the home briefly that night, adding another troubling layer to his already shaky account. Furthermore, investigators discovered a chilling revelation. Shortly after the murders, Heinze had been observed discarding items in a dumpster, a suspicious act he struggled to justify convincingly. Authorities retrieved these objects and discovered among them clothing stained with blood, further implicating Guy Jr. Yet Heinze remained defiant, insisting he was innocent, claiming the bloodstains resulted from his desperate attempt to save his family. He maintained that when he found the victims, he frantically checked for signs of life, inadvertently contaminating himself with blood and evidence. The community was deeply divided. Some residents found it difficult to accept that Guy Jr., visibly distraught and devastated, could commit such a horrifying act against his own family. Others pointed to the overwhelming forensic evidence, growing increasingly convinced he was responsible. On September 4, 2009, the Glynn County Police finally felt they had enough evidence to act decisively. Detectives arrested Guy Heinze Jr., charging him with 8 counts of murder. News of his arrest sent shockwaves through Brunswick, stirring a mix of relief and sorrow. Those who had doubted him now faced a painful truth. Someone they once trusted might be guilty of the unthinkable. At his arraignments and initial hearings, Guy remained subdued yet steadfast in his innocence, refusing to yield under intense scrutiny. His defense team argued passionately that the evidence was circumstantial, pointing to the possibility of unidentified attackers and criticizing investigators for focusing prematurely on Heinze without thoroughly exploring alternatives. Yet prosecutors remained confident, presenting compelling evidence piece by piece, steadily building a narrative of a disturbed young man whose anger or desperation had spiraled tragically out of control. As Brunswick anxiously awaited trial, the community wrestled with a daunting reality. Guy Heinze Jr., a son and friend, now stood accused of the darkest betrayal imaginable, his innocence or guilt poised precariously on the edge of justice. On October 15, 2013, nearly 4 years after the horrific killings, the trial of Guy Heinze Jr. finally began. Inside the Glynn County Courthouse, the courtroom was filled with a tense and somber atmosphere. Family members, survivors, and curious spectators gathered, desperate for clarity, answers, and above all, justice. From the outset, prosecutors painted Guy Heinze Jr. as a troubled young man whose anger and frustration had culminated in brutal violence. They presented meticulous forensic evidence, blood-stained clothing, incriminating items discarded hastily, and a timeline placing Heinze at the crime scene during the critical hours. The prosecution insisted only someone intimately familiar with the victim's routines could have executed such an attack. Heinze sat quietly through testimony, his demeanor carefully guarded. Witness after witness took the stand, neighbors recalling suspicious behavior, friends recounting tensions within the Heinze-Toller household. The prosecution sought to illustrate how resentment and economic stress could boil over into explosive violence, highlighting the strain between Heinze and his father, as well as disputes within the extended family. However, the defense team countered fiercely, arguing that the evidence was entirely circumstantial and lacked concrete proof linking Heinze conclusively to the murders. They emphasized Guy's frantic, emotional 911 call as evidence of genuine shock and grief rather than calculated deception. They also highlighted flaws in police procedure and argued that investigators prematurely locked onto Heinze without adequately considering alternative suspects or scenarios. A particularly emotional moment came during testimony from forensic experts who vividly described the victim's extensive injuries. The courtroom fell silent, shaken by the chilling details. Guy Jr. himself appeared visibly distressed, averting his eyes from graphic photographs displayed as evidence. His attorneys continued to insist that Heinze was incapable of such brutal violence, suggesting instead that multiple attackers must have been involved due to the sheer number of victims and intensity of the assault. They called expert witnesses who testified that the level of brutality was likely beyond the capacity of a single individual. Despite these arguments, the prosecution remained unwavering. They countered that Heinze's familiarity with the victims and layout of the trailer made him uniquely capable of carrying out the attack swiftly and mercilessly. They painted him as an individual capable of sustained rage fueled by desperation or substance abuse, leading to the massacre. As closing arguments began, tension reached its peak. Prosecutors urged jurors to see beyond Heinze's emotional pleas and recognize the weight of evidence linking him directly to the killings. Conversely, the defense implored jurors to consider reasonable doubt, emphasizing gaps in the prosecution's case and the potential for another unidentified killer. Ultimately, the jurors were left with a profound decision. Could they convict based solely on circumstantial evidence and the compelling yet disputed narrative presented by the state? The fate of Guy Heinze Jr. now rested in their hands, and with it, the hopes of an entire community seeking closure from one of Georgia's most disturbing tragedies. After hours of intense deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom on October 25, 2013. As the four-person stood, Guy watched intently, tension visibly gripping him. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Guy Heinze Jr., guilty on all 8 counts of murder," came the solemn declaration. A collective gasp echoed through the room, punctuated by quiet sobs from relatives and friends. Heinze himself slumped in his chair, seemingly crushed by the gravity of the verdict. In sentencing, the state sought the death penalty, arguing that the horrific brutality of the crime merited the ultimate punishment. However, due to complexities in jury deliberations and state laws, Heinze narrowly escaped execution. Instead, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again walk free. Outside the courthouse, emotions ran high. The community remained deeply divided. Many felt justice had finally been served, a brutal killer permanently removed from their midst. Others expressed lingering doubts, haunted by unanswered questions about the crime's brutality and whether one individual alone could have carried it out. In the aftermath, surviving family members grappled painfully with their new reality. The tragedy left wounds that would never fully heal, permanently fracturing families and friendships once tightly bonded. Surviving relatives struggled with the painful knowledge that someone they loved had committed such unspeakable acts. In Brunswick, life slowly moved forward, but the massacre left an indelible scar. The murders reshaped how residents viewed their community, stripping away a sense of innocence and safety. Lot 147 in New Hope, Mobile Home Park, stood empty, a haunting reminder of lives tragically lost, a place many avoided altogether. Over the years, Heinze repeatedly insisted on his innocence, maintaining that justice had failed him. His defense team continued filing appeals, hoping one day new evidence might emerge to prove their claims. Yet each attempt was denied, the courts affirming the initial verdict repeatedly. For Brunswick, closure remained elusive. Even as the town regained some sense of normalcy, the Heinze family massacre lingered in collective memory, a cautionary tale of hidden tensions and unimaginable violence. Community leaders frequently cited the tragedy as a stark reminder to intervene early when conflicts arose, to provide help before emotions exploded into irreversible harm. Ultimately, the legacy of the Heinze family murders persisted as a sobering lesson on the devastating potential of unchecked anger and hidden grievances. The town could never fully shake the shadow of that terrible day, a grim chapter etched permanently into Brunswick's history, a chilling reminder that violence could erupt anywhere, even within the closest and most trusted circles. That's the end of the story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. If you wish, you can also become a paid subscriber to support the channel. Stay safe and see you next time.